There is a quiet truth about the souls of the elderly, one that few dare to speak aloud, yet it lingers like an echo in every wrinkle, every distant gaze, every trembling hand that once held the world with certainty. Alan Watts often said that aging is not the decay of life, but its deepening. It is the moment when the soul begins to remember what it truly is, after decades of pretending to be someone else. Behind the frail body and the fading memories, something timeless awakens, a consciousness that has grown tired of roles and finally longs to return home. The world teaches us to fear growing old, to see it as a slow disappearance. But Watts saw it differently. He believed that as the years strip away the illusions of control, wealth, and importance, the soul begins to shine more clearly through the cracks of the human story. The elderly, he said, are not closer to death, they are closer to truth. Their laughter carries the weight of understanding, and their silence often speaks louder than all the noise of youth. It's not weakness you see in their eyes. It's the reflection of eternity looking back at you. When the body begins to slow, the soul finally finds stillness. Watts believed that this stillness is not resignation, but realization. The elderly start to sense what the young cannot yet grasp. That life was never a straight line, but a dance. That all the striving, all the losses, all the triumphs were movements in a single melody, played by the universe itself. They no longer cling to beginnings or fear endings, because they can feel the rhythm of something larger, the same rhythm that moves the tides, the wind, and the stars. And yet, society often looks away, unable to face what aging truly reveals, that everything we chase will one day fade, and that fading is not tragedy, but transformation. Watts would say that the elderly are living mirrors of impermanence, gentle reminders that existence is not about holding on, but about learning how to let go gracefully. When you sit with them, when you really listen, you can feel that truth vibrating beneath their words. The acceptance, the peace, the knowing that life was never meant to last forever, because it was never meant to end. Perhaps that is the truth few dare to say, that the souls of the elderly are not fading away. They are waking up. They are not becoming less. They are becoming light. Behind every tired step and every trembling breath lies a sacred realization, that all along, they were not walking toward death, but toward home. And if you can see that in them, even for a moment, you will understand what Alan Watts meant when he said, "To be truly alive is to be ready to die at any moment." Alan Watts often said that human beings misunderstand aging because they view life as a line, a journey from birth to death. But he reminded us that existence moves in circles, not in straight paths. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, as waves rise and fall, every life contains both beginnings and endings at once. What we call getting old is not decline, it is return, the soul folding back into itself after playing the grand game of identity. To the unawakened, this looks like loss. But to the wise, it is liberation, the release of all the illusions that once held them captive. In youth, we are consumed by becoming, by striving to be someone, to achieve, to matter. We live chasing horizons, never realizing that the horizon itself is an illusion. Watts believed that this endless striving is necessary but temporary, a vital part of the dance that allows the soul to experience separation before remembering its unity. The elderly, having played this game long enough, begin to see through it. They no longer mistake the mask for the face, or the role for the being behind it. They start to laugh at life's seriousness, because they finally understand it was all play from the beginning. When you sit beside someone who has lived many decades, you can often feel it, a certain stillness, a quiet humor that doesn't come from apathy, but from insight. Watts described this as the soul's laughter, the gentle joy of seeing how everything that once felt so urgent was only the universe dancing with itself. The elderly who awaken to this truth no longer fight against time. They flow with it. Their bodies may weaken, but their consciousness expands, freed from the constant noise of ambition. He often compared life to music. You don't listen to a symphony just to reach its final note. The purpose of music is to enjoy every moment of it, the highs, the pauses, the changes in tempo. In the same way, The purpose of life is not to arrive somewhere, but to experience the melody as it unfolds. The elderly soul, through years of experience, finally understands this. What younger minds call slowing down is in truth the soul beginning to hear the music clearly for the first time. And so, what appears to the outside world as aging is actually awakening. The body bends, but the awareness behind it stands taller than ever. The eyes may grow dim, but they see more deeply into the heart of things. The soul of the elderly does not weaken, it ripens. It becomes like autumn fruit, full of sweetness and wisdom, releasing its form not out of despair, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. For Alan Watts, the ego, that fragile sense of me, was never the enemy. It was a temporary illusion, a necessary mask that the universe was to play the game of being human. In youth, this mask is vital. It gives us identity, direction, and purpose. But as time passes, the soul begins to outgrow it. Aging, then, is not the destruction of the ego, but its soft surrender. The moment when the actor steps off stage and remembers that the play was never real. This is why so many elderly people radiate a quiet humility. They are no longer hypnotized by the idea of being someone. They have become spacious, open to the vastness that exists beyond personality. What's explained that much of our suffering comes from clinging to a self-image that cannot survive the passage of time. We fear wrinkles, weakness, and loss because they threaten the identity we've built. Yet this identity was never solid to begin with. The elderly who have touched wisdom no longer fight this truth. They see that every role, the parent, the worker, the dreamer, the lover, was simply a costume worn for a while. And when the time comes to take it off, they do so gracefully because they know what lies beneath the costume has never aged at all. He often used the metaphor of waves in the ocean. Each wave rises, peaks, and falls, believing itself separate, but it is never apart from the sea. The ego is that wave, temporary, fleeting, and beautiful precisely because it doesn't last. Aging reveals this truth with perfect clarity. When the wave begins to recede, it finally understands that returning to the sea is not death, but reunion. This realization is what gives the elderly soul its serenity. It is not resignation, it is remembrance. The ego's final lesson, Watts said, is learning how to disappear, not as an act of defeat, but as an act of grace. To vanish without bitterness is the highest wisdom, because it means you have finally understood the game. Those who cling to youth, fame, or identity are like waves trying to resist the tide. But those who let go dissolve into peace. They do not lose themselves. They expand beyond themselves. The soul, freed from the illusion of I, merges once more with the great awareness that has been playing through all beings since the beginning of time. And perhaps this is why the eyes of the elderly often carry that distant glow, as if they are already halfway between worlds. The ego may still whisper, but the soul no longer listens. It smiles at the drama, knowing that every story, no matter how grand or small, ends the same way, not in tragedy, but in truth. Because to the awakened, the end of the self is not darkness, it is dawn. Alan Watts often said that as the body grows quieter, the soul grows louder. The stillness that often comes with age is not emptiness, it is depth. The elderly soul begins to move differently through time, not as someone racing toward the end, but as one who has started to dissolve into the rhythm of existence itself. In the silence between each heartbeat, they start to hear something that was always there, the subtle hum of being. This stillness is not resignation. It is recognition, the understanding that the greatest truths of life are whispered, not shouted. To the young, stillness feels like stagnation. To the awakened elder, it is clarity. Watts described this shift as moving from the doing mind to the being mind, the place where one stops asking, what's next, and instead begins to wonder, what is now? The elderly who embrace this awareness stop measuring life by accomplishments or regrets. They start seeing everything, the cup of tea, the sunset, the slow walk down the hallway, as sacred. Each moment becomes complete in itself, not a means to anything more. This stillness also carries an emotional power that words cannot touch. It's why the presence of an elderly soul can change the atmosphere of a room without them saying a word. They no longer need to prove or perform. Their existence alone becomes teaching. What's believed that this kind of presence is what true enlightenment looks like. Not fireworks, not revelation, but a deep and abiding peace with what is. The elderly do not escape the world. They merge with it, until every breath they take feels like an act of communion. In this stage, fear begins to fade, not because the unknown becomes less mysterious, but because it becomes familiar. The elderly who awaken see that death is not coming toward them. It has been walking with them all along, as a silent friend. Watts compared this realization to the calm of a wave that finally recognizes itself as the ocean. There is no need to resist the tide when you know you are made of the same water. What remains is a profound calm, a stillness born not of detachment, but of belonging. And this is perhaps the most beautiful paradox of aging. As the body grows smaller, the soul expands. It stretches beyond identity, beyond fear, beyond the illusion of control. The stillness of the elderly soul is not the quiet before the end. It is the quiet after awakening, the serene knowing that nothing ever truly ends, because nothing ever truly begins. Alan Watts believed that aging is not a movement toward death, but a return to the source, the place from which all life flows. He would often describe the soul's journey as a spiral, not a line. Every experience, every joy, every sorrow is a step that leads us back to where we started, only now with understanding. The elderly soul is the completion of this spiral. It no longer looks outward for meaning, because it has finally realized that meaning was never something to find. It was something to remember. As the years pass, life begins to strip away everything that is not essential. The possessions, the ambitions, the noise, they all fall away like leaves in autumn. What remains is what was always there, consciousness itself. Watts said that this is not loss but revelation. The soul of the elderly person does not diminish. It becomes transparent, allowing the infinite light of awareness to shine through. The veil between the self and the divine grows thinner with every passing day. This process, however, is not always gentle. The ego resists, even in the final act. It clings to stories, to identities, to names. But the wise do not fight this resistance. They watch it, they smile at it, and they let it fade naturally, like smoke dissolving into the air. Watts often compared this to a river returning to the sea. The water may swirl, foam, and crash as it nears the ocean, but the pull of unity is irresistible. No matter how turbulent the journey, the destination is peace. The elderly who have awakened to this truth radiate a kind of quiet joy that comes from no longer trying to control life. They understand that the river was never separate from the sea to begin with. It only thought it was. Death, to them, is not an ending but a homecoming. The same energy that once bloomed as a child, loved as an adult, and wept in loss now flows freely back into the vastness from which it came. Watts described this not as the disappearance of the self, but as its completion, the realization that the self was never apart from the whole. And so, when you look into the eyes of an elderly soul who has understood this, you are not seeing age. You are seeing eternity peeking through. You are seeing the universe remembering itself, wearing the face of wisdom. That is the truth about the souls of the elderly that few dare to say. They are not fading. They are arriving. They are not dying. They are returning to the source, carrying the entire story of humanity back into the infinite silence that gave birth. Alan Watts often taught that the greatest act of wisdom is learning how to let go. In youth, we cling to identity, to control, to dreams that promise permanence. But aging teaches us that clinging is a gentle form of suffering. The elderly soul, through years of loss and rediscovery, finally understands that everything in life is meant to pass through you, not belong to you. To release is not to give up. It is to return things to their natural flow. Watts would say that wisdom is not about accumulating more, but about carrying less, shedding the unnecessary layers until only truth remains. This release begins quietly. The elderly stop fighting the inevitable changes that life brings, the fading of beauty, the loss of strength, the passing of those they love. Instead, they start to see a sacred rhythm in all. Every loss becomes an act of grace. Every goodbye a deeper understanding of connection. The younger self once feared these things as endings, but the awakened elder sees them as openings, spaces through which light can enter. When they let go, life ceases to be a struggle and becomes a river once more, flowing without resistance toward the sea of infinity. Watts believed that this ability to release is what transforms aging from tragedy into transcendence. The ego fights to hold on, but the soul smiles and whispers, "You were never holding anything. You were always being held." The elderly who embrace this truth begin to glow with a certain softness, a humility that is neither defeat nor denial. It is the radiance of someone who has stopped pretending to control the tide. They do not mourn what is fading because they finally see that what they love has only changed form. To release also means to forgive, not just others, but oneself. The elderly soul learns that guilt and regret are chains that belong to time, and time itself is only a dream. Watts said that the present moment is the only reality, and that when one truly awakens to it, the past dissolves like smoke. The awakened elder, then, carries no bitterness for what was or what could have been. They look upon their life the way a painter looks upon a finished canvas, not wishing to repaint it, but to appreciate the beauty of its imperfections. This, perhaps, is why many elderly souls radiate peace even when the body grows frail. They have made peace with impermanence. They have seen that life is not a possession, but a performance, a play in which the only way to honor the story is to let it end gracefully. And so, they bow not in sorrow, but in gratitude. For letting go is not losing life, it is becoming one with it. Alan Watts believed that memory is not a record of the past. It is the soul's way of reflecting on itself. For the elderly, memory becomes a mirror, showing them the full spectrum of who they have been. It is through this reflection that understanding blossoms. As they revisit moments of love, loss, laughter, and pain, the awakened see something remarkable, that everything was necessary. Nothing was wasted. Even the mistakes, even the heartbreaks, were part of the cosmic dance that shaped the soul into what it is now. To the unawakened, memory becomes a prison, a replay of regrets and mischances. But to the awakened elder, it is liberation. They begin to see how every encounter was the universe meeting itself in disguise. Every person, every place, every joy and sorrow was a reflection of consciousness exploring its infinite faces. Watts described this as the soul watching its own movie, not with attachment, but with fascination. The elderly who awaken to this truth no longer mourn the past. They marvel at it. This is why, when the elderly tell their stories, there's something sacred about the way they speak. Their words carry not just recollection, but revelation. They no longer glorify youth or fear age. They speak from a place beyond both. Watts would say that they've begun to see life as art, beautiful not because it's perfect, but because it's fleeting. The memories, once heavy, now float like petals on water, drifting peacefully in the current of being. In this mirror of memory, forgiveness also becomes effortless. The awakened elderly no longer judge their past selves. They see them as chapters in a divine narrative that had to unfold exactly as it did. The anger that once burned has cooled into understanding. The sorrow that once ached has softened into gratitude. They see clearly that life was never a straight line of victories and failures. It was always a circle of experience returning to itself. And so, memory ceases to be a burden. It becomes light. The elderly soul carries it not as weight, but as wisdom. Every remembered moment becomes a jewel of consciousness, each one reflecting a different facet of the same infinite whole. And when they look into that mirror one last time, they no longer see a story of me. They see only life, living itself, through every form it ever loved. Alan Watts often said that the soul never grows old, only the costume does. Beneath every wrinkle, every trembling hand, and every slowing breath, there's a light that does not age. It's the same light that looked out from your childhood eyes, the same awareness that has been silently witnessing every chapter of your story. For the awakened elderly, this realization becomes undeniable. They no longer identify with the reflection in the mirror. They see through it. The body is no longer me. It is the sacred vessel through which eternity experienced time. This is why the eyes of the elderly often seem to hold galaxies within them. They have seen joy and grief, birth and death, beginnings and endings. And in all of it, the same presence watching. What's described this as the soul remembering itself, realizing that it was never a fragment, but the whole cosmos playing at being human. When you look into the eyes of one who has truly awakened in their later years, you feel something infinite staring back. It's not just wisdom, it's recognition. The same light that shines through them shines through you. In this stage of awareness, even the fear of death begins to vanish. The elderly soul understands that what dies is not the light, but the lamp. The body fades, the personality dissolves, but the consciousness behind it, the one that has been watching since the very first breath, remains untouched. What's would often say that death is like taking off a tight shoe. You don't lose anything essential. You simply release what was never yours to keep. This is why those who truly awaken near the end often radiate peace instead of dread. They are not leaving life. They are merging with it fully. The elderly soul, illuminated by this understanding, begins to view others with profound compassion. They see that everyone, young or old, is struggling to remember who they really are. What's said that when you truly awaken, you stop trying to change people and begin to love them instead, because you realize they are all you, in different stages of remembering. The elderly who live in this light become silent teachers, embodying truths that words can't capture. Their presence alone softens hearts, because they remind us of something our busy minds forget, that all of this is temporary, but what lives through it is eternal. And so, the light behind their eyes becomes a message, not a farewell, but of continuation. It tells us that consciousness does not end when the body rests. It shifts, it expands, it returns to the vastness from which it came. The elderly soul, standing on the edge of infinity, does not mourn what is ending. It smiles at the beauty of the illusion, bows to the mystery, and steps through the veil, not into darkness, but into light. Alan Watts believed that life and death are not opposites, but two halves of the same heartbeat, the inhale and exhale of the universe itself. The elderly soul, at the final stage of the journey, begins to feel this truth intimately. They no longer see death as departure, but as return, a dissolving of the boundaries that once gave the illusion of separateness. To them, the end is not something to resist. It is something to honor, as the last and most sacred act of participation in existence. As the body grows weaker, the awareness within grows vast. The senses begin to fade, but the inner vision becomes brighter. Watts compared this to a drop of water rejoining the ocean. The form disappears, but the essence remains, more alive than ever. The elderly who awaken to this truth experience something extraordinary: serenity. They realize that they are not falling into nothingness. They are falling back into everything. The return is not loss. It is completion. In this state, even pain and fragility take on new meaning. The elderly soul sees the body not as a failing vessel, but as a symbol, a reminder that every form must one day dissolve so that life can renew itself. They see beauty in the cracks, grace in the fading. Watts said that to truly live is to live as the seasons do, to rise, to blossom, to wither, and to rest, all without resistance. The elderly who accept this rhythm begin to live their final days not with despair, but with reverence. Every breath becomes a prayer of gratitude for having been part of the cosmic dance. And then, something profound happens. Fear turns into wonder. The question of what comes next no longer matters, because the soul can feel it already, the pull of the eternal, the warmth of return. Watts described this moment as the universe recognizing itself. The soul that once thought it was separate now dissolves into the infinite presence it had been seeking all along. Death is not a curtain falling. It is a horizon expanding. So, when the elderly soul finally lets go, It is not surrender and defeat, but in grace. The story ends only to reveal that it was never separate from a storyteller. The truth that few dare to say, and that what's whispered all along, is that the elderly are not fading from life. They are awakening into eternity. What we call the end is simply life remembering its own name. And that name, unspoken but eternal, is love. Maybe the truth about the souls of the elderly isn't about endings at all, but about remembering what has always been eternal. As Alan Watts often reminded us, life is not a straight journey from birth to death, but a great returning, the wave folding back into the sea that gave it rise. When you look into the eyes of an elder who has truly awakened, you're not seeing someone fading away. You're seeing the universe softening into its own reflection. The hands may tremble, the steps may slow, but what shines through them is timeless awareness, the part of us that has never aged, never been born, and will never die. Watts believed that those who have lived long enough begin to hear the music of existence differently. They no longer rush to the next note. They let the melody linger. They understand that the pauses, the silences between, are what give the song its beauty. To the awakened elder, even the approach of death feels like harmony, not interruption. It is the final chord that completes the composition. And perhaps this is what true wisdom sounds like. The soul's quiet applause at the end of its own magnificent performance. What we often mistake for loss is actually transformation. The elderly who live in awareness are not disappearing. They are dissolving into vastness. They have stopped fearing time because they have realized they were never inside of it. The world may call it aging, but the soul calls it awakening. Watts would say that life and death are simply two sides of the same gesture, one opening, one closing, both belonging to the same eternal hand. When you see this, fear fades, and all that remains is gratitude. Gratitude for having been here, even for a brief moment, as the universe remembering itself. So when you next see an elderly soul, whether it's your parent, your grandparent, or even a stranger sitting quietly on a park bench, look deeper. You might glimpse eternity looking back at you. Behind that gentle smile is not resignation, but understanding. Not sorrow, but completion. The soul that has lived enough begins to shine with the calm of someone who has seen through the illusion and found peace within it. That is the truth that few dare to say, that the elderly are not walking toward death. They are walking into light. And if this reflection touched something in you, if it made you see life, aging, or your own soul in a new way, then stay connected. Subscribe, share your thoughts below, and let this space become a gathering of awake minds and timeless hearts. Because one day, we too will stand at that edge, and perhaps we'll smile, knowing, as Alan Watts once said, you are something that the whole universe is doing in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing.